Elizabeth, it's so great to connect today. We have a number of overlapping research topics, a number of mutual connections and colleagues. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
So, as you think back on your research and your career, what story or experience have you had or thing have you learned that you would most want to pass on to others?
So, in thinking about that, I wanted to go all the way back to when I was completing my dissertation at Tulane University. And while I was there, I had the honor and the privilege of working with two amazing scholars. So, Rob Folger and then Arthur Brief. And Rob was a researcher interested in fairness, and Art was a researcher interested in ethics. And so I was pondering what I would do for my dissertation, and I wanted to do something I knew on fairness and ethics. And as I looked around the world, I was trying to figure out, well, what is missing in our literature? And at the time, we were interviewing candidates to come in to potentially be professors. And they were asked questions, and a really common question that the candidates would ask is, so how safe is New Orleans? That's where Tulane is located. And many people would say, you know what, it's no more unsafe than any other big city. And I found myself saying the same thing. So no more unsafe than any other big city. And then after multiple candidates, I started to think back on what I was saying. And for some reason I stopped as I was saying it one day. And I said, you know what? It's actually really unsafe. Because it is. It's really unsafe. At least all the other cities that I've ever lived in did not even approach the level of crime that was in New Orleans. So I lived in Dallas and I've lived in Austin before. And I'd also visited other big cities. And New Orleans was significantly more dangerous than those other places. And so then I started to think about, well, why am I saying this? I mean, I know that's not true. And yet here I am saying something that I know that's not true, while at the same time studying ethics, by the way. And so, one would think that studying ethics, I would carefully reflect on my own thoughts and behaviors quite frequently. And this one kind of got past me. And so I was thinking more and more about it. And I recognized that there was a hole in the literature and that most people in our field were studying things like stealing from either their own organization or from another organization. People were also studying things like sabotage. So I would sabotage to harm. So I had an intention to harm. And I would go and I would sabotage my organization or some other organization. And so this is a type of unethical behavior that I was doing and that I perceived others were doing too, that was a little bit different. And so my dissertation came from that, and it was unethical behavior that had the intention to benefit others. So we were lying so I asked a bunch of people why we were saying this, and the people who were sharing also reflected back. It's like, yeah, this is pretty dangerous compared to other cities. Why are we saying this? And so we thought that maybe it was because we wanted to help the school. So then I started to interview some executives and find out, so are you doing these types of things, or have you seen these types of things in your world? Are you seeing that you're doing maybe, or you're watching other people do unethical things to benefit others in your organizations? And it turns out people really felt like there was a lot of this going on, that people were lying to make a sale to help their organization. They were not sharing the truth about performance, about their subordinates or their supervisors, that they were doing a variety of things to hide bad performance or bad negative things about their organizations, and maybe like I was doing, hide things about their city or their university in order to attract people to come to that university or organization. And so I started to see a lot of this type of behavior, and that was the subject of my dissertation. And so originally I proposed that we would do these type of, and what it ended up being called, unethical pro-organizational behaviors or unethical pro-social behaviors. So I'm doing something unethical in order to help others. And so it ended up, I studied in my dissertation that people did these behaviors in response to fair treatment. And so I did four different studies and I manipulated fairness or I measured fairness. And then I measured if people engaged in these type of unethical pro-organizational behaviors. And I found nothing. I
Mm.
didn't find one thing. None of my hypotheses were supported. And so after that, I recognized, okay, people aren't doing this in response to fairness, and maybe many people would, drop the research at that point and move on and just say, okay, well, maybe this isn't the case. Maybe this isn't a real type of behavior. However, when I went on the job market and I interviewed at multiple schools, I found that this behavior was really resonating with people, that this
Yeah.
was in the real world and we weren't really capturing it in our literature. And so I worked with John Bingham and Marie Mitchell on looking at how identification. So if I identify with the organization, then I'm more likely to engage in these types of unethical pro-organizational behaviors. And so we ended up finding really strong findings. So it wasn't fairness, it was really identification. So if I identify with the organization, I'm more likely to engage in this behavior. And since that study and other studies, there's been almost 100 different studies on the topic, and it just continues to grow. So that's pretty exciting. I'm really I want to say that I'm proud of introducing this to the field, but
Yeah.
it also came from my own unethical behavior. So it's kind of conflicting in that way. So that my own unethical behavior ended up reflecting back and trying to find out more about this behavior. And we see it everywhere. And right now, even yesterday, I had the opportunity to talk to someone who engaged in hockey for 20 years, so professional hockey. And there's something called enforcers in hockey. And
Mm.
enforcers are people who, let's say the other team does something, maybe hurts my star player. And it could be accidental or it could be on purpose, but if it's on purpose, then it's more harmful or seen as more harmful.
Hmm.
Then the enforcer gets put on the ice, and their job is to go beat up or do something harmful to the person who just harmed our star player. And so in organizations, there are these people sometimes who do dirty work, do the dirty work for our leaders or our organizations. Now, hopefully, this is not within all organizations, but there certainly are examples of people doing this type of dirty work. So continuing to understand this type of behavior has just been something that I've been doing for over 20 years.
Such an interesting story. And I have to start by saying when I started my PhD, I took my first organizational behavior seminar at the University of Utah was from Arthur Brief. So
Oh, yay!
Art and I go way back as well. Such an interesting finding. When I was at Notre Dame, I was teaching business ethics, and one of the assignments I would do is ask people to write about an ethical lapse. And it's not hard. Sadly, it's not hard for people to uh, think of an ethical lapse. And these are Notre Dame students who, many of them go to Notre Dame because they really want more out of a business education than just, make money. They really care about society and ethics. And uh, it's just it's amazing how easy it is for us to commit unethical behaviors. And what I love about your work is it shows us that even if we're trying to be ethical, we're still so prone, even though we might be doing it for what we think is a good reason, we're still so prone to behave unethically.
Absolutely. We are human beings, and human beings, unfortunately, have the capacity to behave unethically in pretty horrible ways. And especially when we have a really good excuse or justification for doing so. And when someone has harmed our group or we perceive that someone's harmed our group, then we have unfortunately, we give ourselves grace in order to engage in some really terrible things towards the other group. And so what we need, and that just creates that negative spiral. So they're going to be more unethical to us, and it's just going to continue on. And so in those moments, it is important to consider all types of unethical behavior and keep ourselves to that higher standard and recognize when we do fall short. So we are going to fall short. We are not None of us are perfect. We are going to fall short in all sorts of behavior. So just like, our tennis ability or our math ability or any other type of ability, our ethical behavior is similar. So we're going to fall short in our ethical behavior, and to be vigilant and to be thinking about that and moving forward. So it needs to be something that we focus on in when we're making decisions in management, when we're making decisions as leaders, that including financial performance and other types of performance, we need to be thinking also about our ethical performance. And that is going to be the cure to where we don't engage in these unethical pro-organizational behaviors. These tend to be pretty insidious because we might even be rewarded based on them.
Yeah.
Other people might be feeling positive feelings towards us based on them. And so they're pretty insidious. And so keeping a watch out on these type of unethical behaviors is really, again, I was doing it too. So we all need to be vigilant and just really be thinking about our ethical performance, like all the other types of performance that we think about.
So I posted something on LinkedIn a while back. I had done an interview with Ann Tenbrensel, who was
Oh, yay!
Ann was my postdoc advisor at Notre Dame. And I love Ann. And so I'd posted something about how we're all prone to commit unethical behaviors. And somebody on LinkedIn responded that, they're not. And like how could you admit to behaving unethically? And maybe they didn't understand the point I was making. Maybe I didn't articulate it correctly. But from my perspective and my experience, we're just so good at justifying. It's so
Oh, yeah.
easy for us to justify our unethical behavior. And one of the most interesting stories I've heard is, or an example, I guess I would say, is Aaron Beam was a CFO of a publicly traded company that just took off like a rocket. And the CEO was a man named Richard Scrushy. And Richard approached Aaron one day early on in the company and said, "Hey, Aaron, will you come into my office with these, I'm working on this contract and with a potential partner. Will you come into this meeting with me and let's negotiate this contract?" So they go into the meeting, and in the meeting, Richard says to their counterparty, says, "Aaron and I have been working on this contract all night, and da 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 da." And Aaron, thinks, well, I wasn't working on this contract all night, but Richard's just being nice. He's just, this is like a pro-social, unethical behavior. And ultimately, what happened is Aaron eventually ended up committing fraud and lying on the financial statements and went to prison. And he always thinks back to that one moment when
Mhm.
Richard was sizing him up. Richard was kind of thinking ahead and wanted to include Aaron in a lie. And Aaron just thinks, in that moment, had I just called him out on it, or after the fact, even just said, "Hey, don't include me in a lie." But because it felt pro-social, and because we're so quick to justify unethical behavior, he found himself in prison. And so I just love your work of thinking not only about like, yeah, of course we shouldn't behave unethically, but we really need to be on guard for the pro-social, the pro-social unethical behaviors.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of different examples like the one you shared. And yes, I agree. We need to be on the lookout for those. And there will continue to be. It's something about human beings. So we're super group focused. And so this is it's easy to mask the ethicality associated with a behavior when we can focus on the good that we're doing by
Yeah.
doing this unethical act.
So maybe you
And
already,
but no, not everybody's going to focus on the good that we're doing. That's the other thing to recognize is that other people tend to be harsh critics of us, especially other people from other groups. And I mean, who is going to be the jury? Who's going to be making that decision? They're not going to be from your group.
yeah,
So they're going to
I love the
be,
advice of like, imagine your worst critic and how
yes,
would they view your behavior?
yeah.
So
Uh,
maybe you
but
already answered this question, but as you're thinking about how to combat this, I really love this idea of thinking about ethics in terms of like a performance band. Like some days we have it, some
yeah.
days we don't. Some days we're shooting well, some days we're not. Some days we're more ethical than others. Uh, how do you go about specifically combating or being aware of these pro unethical behaviors? Pro-social unethical behavior. I'll edit this.
No, you're
I'll
doing
edit this
great.
segment,
I think
man.
that. The term actually came from reviewers. That reviewers asked us to change
Oh,
the term.
interesting.
So I originally call it unethical citizenship behaviors because I thought these were more like we were doing these things to help the organization.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm fine with pro-organizational behaviors. And so I think the biggest way to combat it is to think about other stakeholders other than because usually we're harming some other stakeholder. We're
yeah.
harming a customer, we're harming a client, we're harming our supervisor, we're harming our greater entity. So think about other entities and the impact of the behavior on other entities. And also just consider ethicality as just one of your types of performance moving forward. Usually, and you know this, when people walk into their church, their synagogue, a place, maybe nature, they are considering ethicality more. But when
Yeah.
they enter into their organizations, they might not be. They might not think that ethics has a place here. Or they might just assume, like maybe the person who commented on your LinkedIn, that I'm behaving ethically because I'm an ethical person. And so it's important to question that. It's important to, yes, you're a good person, but maybe I'm going to go with Dolly Chug's work and we're a good-ish people.
Yeah.
Like we have the intention to behave in a positive way, and maybe our positive behaviors are pretty unethical and negative for other people. So let's continue to question our own behavior and be and consider ethicality as just another form when we're thinking about accounting, when we're thinking about finance, when we're thinking about other types of behavior. Let's also think about ethicality. And maybe when if we have to explain behaviors, like think about it, when we're doing something that in our workplace, if we can explain it to others, and if we have a hard time explaining it to where it sounds like it's okay, that's a hint that something's going wrong.
Yeah.
I'm probably doing something not so great. So if we have to engage in lots of explanations and lots of justifications, there's a hint that something's astray.
So I love that framework. Think about other stakeholders, imagine their perspective on your behavior. And if it takes a long time to justify the behavior, if we feel like we're jumping through hoops, that's another clue. And then I just love it. I love thinking about ethics in terms of it's a skill to be developed. And it's
Yes.
something that Ann Tim Brunzel talked about. It's something to work at and try to improve at. And if we just expect to be good at ethics, that's like expecting to be good at basketball or expecting to be good at any other uh, behavior that requires skill. Well, Elizabeth, this is so great. I love this lesson. I'm so grateful that you persisted with your research and were able to find that it wasn't just fairness, that it was this sense of loyalty, connection, pro-social aspect that causes us to behave unethically. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.